Already mentioned.
Okay, perfect.
Prof. Glickman is visiting professor of practice at Kotak School of Sustainability, and he's based out of US. He's kind enough to help us in achieving our net zero goals in long term and carbon neutrality in medium to short term goal. And he has been champion of practical sustainability and has implemented it on Infosys and Microsoft campuses. He was Chief Sustainability Officer of Infosys Technologies for 6 years or more maybe, right?
Yeah, a little more.
So yeah, and that's all I think.
That's great. So I know we're here to talk, we're going to do 2 lectures and they're going to be completely different, but you'll see common themes in this. So first of all, thank you very much for spending your time. And this can be interactive. There's plenty of room for discussions here. And what I would say is since I don't speak Hindi or anything else, if I'm speaking too fast, just say or repeat something. I'm not insulted, okay? Because I'll speak at the speed that comes to me. So what this program is about, I'm associated with Berkeley University and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And I guess I would start off with a question here. Is anybody familiar with the national labs in the United States? Okay, all right. So I was going to say, could anybody name any of them? But the short story is this. Right before World War II, the government really started to look at how to tie academia and science and research in order to propel science, to propel the economy, in this case, work on programs like developing the atomic program or looking at electricity and the impact across there. So there were national labs that were established across the country that still are very foundational. There's still this relationship of research and academia that gets translated to the private equity world, to other institutions. And these labs follow a national agenda because of that. So they receive quite a bit of, almost all of their funding through these, and they're also attached to schools. So I'll actually have a map to show you a little bit about how many of labs are, but there are 17 labs that have now evolved across there, and they're really where most of our development takes place. Cradle to Commerce program, what this means is obviously from birth to a landing place. And in this case, it's about commerce. And the idea is how to take scientists or researchers and turn them into entrepreneurs. So it's along that same story that many of you might be going down that path. And what this specifically does, because as you would imagine, or at least what's obvious in the US and other areas, there's already a mechanism in place for venture capitalists or companies that you might go to. However, there really hasn't been a strong link with the best labs that we have, because these labs do what we would call is the tough technology. So this is not a place where you would be developing software. Though now there's probably going to be one that would be doing artificial intelligence. We'll see where this goes. But this is where nuclear is developed. This is where chemistry is developed. This is where large hydroelectric decisions are made through here. So this is what we would call tough technology. So these are heavy-duty researchers that have very unique accelerators and things that you just would never find in the private sector. So the idea was to say how to take people that are working there and help them capitalize their knowledge and perhaps run businesses and go down this path. The second could be that as an outside person who is in a business path needs to be able to figure out a nuclear reactor or something, they can now get time in a lab. It's making it accessible. It doesn't cost them anything other than writing for the grant. That's the idea. And then the third part of it is the concept that we have a national agenda that's funded through national dollars. So the previous presidency, Biden, had had a large climate agenda that said we are putting $1 trillion into the economy. So how do we know that that $1 trillion is focused on the things that it serves the national good across the way? So this is what we brought together. And then what was unique about this solution is that for the first time, the labs will be working together because they've always been competitive, as you could imagine, looking for their dollars, just like schools are competitive. So the agreement was to say, we will combine the labs and give access through here. So this is the beginning of the story of how to do this. So the problem that it's looking to solve is the following. With any kind of technology, but particularly with the climate tech, we know that there's a big barrier, there's a disconnect, right, of understanding what has to take place between what the labs are doing and what the market is asking for. And what that really means is the labs have long-term plans to say, I'm going to develop fusion, or I'm going to do the next nanotechnologies, things that they can tackle. However, what is the market asking for? And where is that spent? So how do we connect it? So this technical commercialization wave is a standard model that you have to address. It starts with research and development. It goes to field validation and demonstration. Then there's a scale up and launch. There's a deployment, and then there's a market transformation that takes place. And we actually put these things that we put in here that in the research and development with government work, we call technical readiness level was 1 through 4. We actually say there's like this Death Valley action that happens. You start, and then it starts to die off. It's a very hard barrier to pass through there. Then you have to get to the field validation and the demonstration component, and this is where you do product prototyping and your pilots. Most academics and scientists understand this part. It's getting to scale up in commercial where the path really starts to get very difficult for everybody to go across there. And you start seeing public and private relationships coming through here. And you will also then, so forth, deployment and transformation. So this program is focused in this area of how to fix this, specifically this part. I can explain what we did with the research and development on another slide, how we tackled it, but a lot of the conversation is going to be over here. Following me so far? So it should be nothing too surprising, I hope, for me. So we had to choose the specific areas that we could focus on. The program is going into its 3rd year. And this is what we are promising people who get involved, who apply to put their teams in place. So we're going to give them access to unparalleled science. It's the ideas that you bring, but we could also hook you up with the leading chemist, within one of these labs, or someone who is using the accelerators to discover new elements, if that's what's required to take you someplace. And we're giving you that tech infrastructure. You can literally get access to the Lawrence Berkeley Labs accelerator and have use of it for a year as part of the deal. Okay, as long as you are doing a well-defined experiment through here. We're also going to be introducing world-class entrepreneurial coaching and skills. This is absolutely key. So what you'll see, I'm going to back up a second here just to point something out here. Along the bottom here, you see a bunch of logos. Very quickly, so these are the main labs. This is Argonne National Labs in Chicago, world-leading chemistry, chemical. Started in the 30s. Oak Ridge, very, very famous for starting the first nuclear design and components. INL is the national lab that is currently leading with small modular reactors areas. We've got Berkeley Labs, which is really building science and accelerators and new discovery of elements across here. And then we have government entities, but these two over here, the engine is actually at an MIT, and it is a venture capitalist group that says we can take you and train you to be successful through being business, and how do we move you across there. One Valley and Decisive Point are two of the largest Silicon Valley VCs that will train you and help you put your teams together to navigate you through those death valleys and areas through here. So, going back to this idea of this robust access to investments, we will also fund this amount to each group, $50,000 US. Now, I know that might sound a lot in context, but in the US, that's just barely enough seed money to get you through. The idea is not to fund your whole project, but to have you get through certain toll gates. And this is enough that it gives you 3 or 4 months to learn how to do everything. And then as you qualify to perhaps be chosen to be one of the groups, you can then get additional funding, but you're also asked to find the funding, because part of the class is not just being given everything, but how did you learn the lessons to go through here? So the 4 specific areas that we ask groups to focus on: building science, so smart buildings and other components, grid modernization and energy storage, nuclear energy, and understanding renewables. That was the first 2 years worth of programs. I'll explain at the end of this how we've now expanded this and what will be coming next through here. So the idea is that C2C, so that's the abbreviation for Cradle to Commerce, it accelerates the climate action through both the science and the innovation, so we can have an equitable energy transition. So as we think about rethinking how does energy work, at least in the US, because these are all US-based grants, it's how do we make this transition using that relationship that I talked about. So one is, how do we match commercially viable climate tech innovation developed at national labs with the entrepreneurs? And what's key is the word streamlined. So streamlined is easing that path. We talked about that death valley, or I mentioned that death valley that happens. It's very hard to apply for government grants. How many people here have actually had to write a grant and go ask for money? It's very, very hard. So we actually simplified the forms through the Department of Energy, through the labs, that what was a 60-day process to be done in 5 days. So we simplified that to make that not a barrier. Then we also made this ability to look about incubating these tech companies so that we knew that the removal of gigatons of the gases across those 4 domains could be achieved as one of the KPIs. So those teams were saying, this is the measurement ultimately that you have to reach. How you reach there depends on your project, but this is what you're going to be judged on. Because ultimately, the idea is 60 companies, or 60 groups, or 60 individuals. We take a total of 60, and they start going through this process of toll gates. Everybody's invited at the beginning, they make their pitch, they're given a template to fill out, and out of the 60, through those 4 months, 16 will survive. And out of that 16, if they're all very good ideas, they all go forward, or a certain percentage of them will drop out for various reasons. It could be the science doesn't hold up, it could be the team dynamics are not working, it could be that they just haven't assembled it, or they changed their mind, that they just don't want to go through the process. There's various reasons to it, and I'll show you how many goes through here. But this is the path and the pattern that we've taken. So every year we run a new cycle of 60 companies going through here. And this is the program timeline to give you an overview of what happens. And then I'm going to do a quick deep dive of each step for you. So we started the program with an application. You receive something online. You get 30 days to fill out this application, explain what your project is, who's on your team, or what your idea is. Do you have IP already? Do you have a relationship with one of the labs? Are you an academic? Are you a scientist? Are you somebody off the street? Who are you? But we're really favoring people within the labs or people that are academia to be successful, so they get weighted at a heavier level. Then in the March-June timeframe, we form what we call Legion teams. So this is that set of 60 teams. They're onboarded and they start receiving training of the soft skills. We know they're good at science, but they have to understand how to fill out a grant. They have to understand, do they understand community marketing? Do they understand financials? Do they understand what it takes to bring a company through a set of areas? So we give them training through one of these other groups. And then we then move to a phase 2 where we then select a cohort that says these are the companies that are moving forward, and then there's more hands-on training, and we start working on hard tech development. This is where if you've passed this point, you can start bringing your work actually into the labs, and you can be testing. We might combine teams, we might ask teams to reconfigure, but this is where you truly are applying your craft and you're working side by side with the best people that we have in the labs through here. And we continue with the soft skills training. And then ultimately, we get it down to a few companies that make it forward. And then phase 3, it's commercialization. It's time to leave the nest. You've now proven it out. You actually have some clients. You know where your off-takers are going to be, that you've done your proof points, and you're told how to go get more money. And we don't abandon you, but we start looking at the next group. And by then, if you've learned it, you're kind of on your own, but we all play different roles in here, and I'll explain roles, particularly my role in this cycle with some other folks. Following me so far?
This is open to the global entrepreneurs.
Only to North America, only to US, because it's US labs, US tax dollars.
Solely for you.
Only in. But if you were a student globally in one of these universities, you could apply for this
In US.
and do this, but you have to be at school in the US, right? So if you were technically at a school like at Berkeley and you have a program, you could be in this, but we are going to take into factor, are you going to stay in the country? And will the business be here? Because that's one of the requirements when we're spending the government dollars in these national labs. Now, the aspirational goal, how to think about this. We feel or felt that climate was so important, and many of us still do, though we hear a lot of the news out of the US, and I'll stay out of that at this point, that this idea is as important as other major things that have happened, that labs have solved in the past. So the idea of GPS, the creation of the internet. So this is creation of the internet. This is the idea of GPS. This is NASA, spaceflight. All of these large type national programs all came out of these labs. I have to say, personally, I was involved in 2 of them in my career. So I actually worked on the GPS systems for the Navy through the labs, and I actually worked on the internet, also through Carnegie Mellon and then through other labs in Champaign, Illinois, where a lot of the internet work came through. So understanding the scope of these programs is how we see the end goal of this program towards climate, but we now recognize in the changing world it has to be public and private relationships and partnerships. So whereas in the past, NASA in particular, you would say it all had to be done at a government level, the military level to launch a rocket, we now have SpaceX and we have to take that into account. So how do we leverage privatization? So that's part of how this program is structured to take advantage of those changing factors coming across here. But this is the scope and scale that we are targeting. So here's the breakdown. This is where the 4 labs are located. So this is nuclear, this is up in Idaho. This is Berkeley, where I work out of, with the accelerators. This is closer, I'd say this is Chicago. This would be your chemical, argon. This is Tennessee Valley. Tennessee Valley Oak Ridge was actually the very second lab. I think Argonne was the first, Tennessee Valley was the second one. And they originally were nuclear. So much of the first nuclear work happened out of there. But this is now residential science, which I think is fascinating. The conversation we were having the other day, the importance of residences, that's solely what this lab looks at. Population and residence. And then this is the two engines we talked about. This is MIT, where I actually teach also as a visiting professor with MIT. And this is Decisive Point, which helps commercialize government programs out of DC. So they're the ones who streamline to say, let's get rid of the paperwork and let's make sure the Department of Energy and NASA and everything else that is going on through here. And this over here is Silicon Valley's strongest VC group. So we have the best of the best working on it. So that's the map. And as you can see, there's some components on here. Now, what I don't have on myself in this picture, but there's two other players here. If we think about those cycles of you apply for this application, you start picking up your soft skills, how do you choose the companies or the groups that can become a company? I'm involved in the scaling and commercialization end. They've asked me to look at it to say, in the very beginning of the process, help us look at those 60 companies and say which ones do you think are going to maybe be successful, or what do you think they're going to need, so that, and review their applications. And it's just not myself, there's several other, about 20 of us that look at this, but 2 of us have a larger say. Myself being one, the other is the head of Stanford Business School. So between the 2 of us, we look at this. The other role that we come through, I sit through the presentations, sometimes I visit some projects, but this is left more to the scientists that you see here at each of these labs. But where I come back into the picture is when they start presenting. And as they get down to the 16, I'm in that room that I read every single thing prior, and I listen to every presentation with the other stakeholders. And at the end, we will then decide on those 16. And I help decide that with the others, and then I help them set up in the private world where the commercialization. So I might hook them up to a Dow Chemical, or I might hook them up to another area, and I continue to be a coach as they go on their journey after they've gone past the lab, as does the head of the Stanford Business School. We team together on that, okay? So, we always talk about tough tech. So the hard things to do is really what we focus on and look for these groups. So we're curating and we're providing unprecedented access. They've never had access to these labs unless they were going to that particular institution, and they could rarely get time. Now they're getting dedicated time and dedicated support. And what's very interesting as a scientist or as an academic, you get the IP. The IP might come from, say, Berkeley, and if your project is using that IP, you get rights to that IP commercially. We split the IP. So there is an incentive to do this. Because, once again, it's funded by taxpayer dollars, and therefore, although as long as it serves the national interest, we want you to be commercially successful through here. You get the sourcing, the supporting, we take down those barriers that you would normally see with any kind of business component, and we're working constantly with the public-private sector. So you'll see in some of the examples, battery storage, for example, we've had Elon Musk involved to say, yes, I will take your technology and I will help fund you go forward, or those kinds of examples through here. So once again, it's all that, and it's always being measured in carbon net zero approaches in those 4 areas that we talked about, and it is always measured in how much impact you have on gigaton measurements in what you're doing across here. Those are the 4 national labs that we joined at first, because we had to do our own small pilot. That's a small pilot, I mean 4 national labs suddenly working administratively together for these programs for the first time. We learned enough to say that there are now 13 more labs that we are going to bring on nationally into this program. So we will expand that box of just those 4 areas, because those other labs specialize in other areas. So in our second wave, we're going to go through this. This is a little bit repetitive on the slides here, but once again, the relationship started during World War II with the US government. It delivered science and technology to work on the hardest problems that we were facing in our country for 75 years. And climate challenge has been lifted to that same level of importance through here. And between these labs, there's been a discovery of 22 elements on the periodic table. There's been 118 Nobel Prizes in these labs. This is what we're giving access to through here. And once again, that has never happened before for students or for scientists to say access to this area and access to commercialization. So this is the model that we're using. I briefly mentioned about these groups. So Decisive Point, they invest in deep tech innovations. They might give you funding going forward. They will take the bets on the companies that go forward. They will provide the hands-on through the whole process, and they might say, we're going to fund your company going forward, or we will hook you up with somebody. They will pair Capital Alliance with public R&D funding. They take care of all of that. You have to do the work, but someone's holding your hand, and this will not stop you from working. It's just, is your idea good enough, and is your team strong enough? The engine out of MIT, they bring experience in the soft skill training. So they're not so much in finding you the funding, but they're where you would take your classes and practice your presentations and really make sure it's bulletproof of what it is that you're doing across there. And then One Valley, they bring in 250 mentors that you have access to, and they will bring in the strategic partnerships to fill the gaps. I also know that as we see the teams go through the process, we will sometimes take a team apart. We're very harsh. We'll just say this team isn't working, but these two individuals would do better if we combine them here, or this team needs to come back next year. I mean, it's got to be fair to everybody else. So we make hard decisions because that's how life is, but you'll see that we've had a very high success rate. So within the 24-month period, and this is the first time we've run the program, so we're learning as we're going through here, this is what we've accomplished. They've accessed over 111 pieces of IP from national labs that were never accessed before into the economy. So they never would have had access to it. It's actually now accessed. They own the IP if you went through this program, and it's being used for climate technologies. That's very, very, very powerful. Never could happen before unless you were a lifetime lab applicant, if you were that lucky. Second, carbon projection tools for them to train on have been developed by us so that they can say what it is they're working, how does it truly get measured, and this is for national standards. So this is by NSTI, the National Standards Training. So this is our national measurements through here. We've developed 3 tools on the side. So this is how we judge fairly. We've created 56 test beds in prototyping facilities in 2 years. So I don't know enough yet in this school how long it takes to create something across your whole system of schools. But for the 4 labs, it was a big accomplishment. It took a lot of work, dedicated people. But we run on a team totally across these 4 labs of 20 people. So it's not a lot of people, right, that is making this happen, and they have other jobs also. We've brought in and successfully landed over 170 private partners into the program that have agreed to take on the technology and the teams that are coming across here. So that's been very, very good. And we have passed through 161 teams. Have gone through the program. Not all of them have made it. There's a small percentage, and I'll actually show you the teams and talk a little about each one of them. But that is a lot of applications. We received thousands of applications, as you can imagine. We were able to take on 161 teams and bring them through various stage gates and processes through here. So this is our measurements of accomplishment. So a little bit about the teams. So these are the teams that have survived through here. I can give you the number that our target was to take 16. We ended up with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams that actually have made it and gone commercial. Their 2 teams dropped out of the 16. They just could not work as a team, failed. The other ones, they could not find the money, which meant their ideas were not valid enough to come across there. But it's a pretty good percentage to go from 160 teams that had a chance to 16 teams that went through the process, that actually 50% success rate went through there. And some of those teams that failed have applied for the next year. Doesn't mean they're out of it. They just have to compete again, and some will come back in, some won't. We'll see where they go. And some teams that dropped out actually got commercial money along the path, and they said, we don't want to be involved anymore because we already found our funding, and somebody's picking us up. So even the 160 teams, 16 beyond this, some of them still use that property, and they went on and did well across here. So, tough technology. Better batteries for buildings. A total of 3 people are the key people that are running this. One that's called Electric Fish. They do flexible EV infrastructures components. AM Power is decarbonization of marine transportation for zero emissions. I love the names. Mantatherm, conductive ceramic composites for high temperature thermal energy storage. You would not be able to do this in the United States unless you have access to a lab with the IP and the patents. It's just too hard and too expensive for the science. QSense, decarbonizing buildings through thermo LiDAR sensors. So they took the idea of LiDAR, and they're using this inside of buildings in order to decarbonize, and they created a data set that's called AutoCubes that are basically data bricks that build real-time digital twins, and now it's been commercialized and being used in cities. It's very, very interesting technology. And they actually have gotten $3 million in funding, and they just got $80 million in funding over the 2-year period because it was that good of an idea that had instant application. This one right here, Aris Hygienics. So this is efficient, low-cost, all-in-one replacement for high-emissions thermal appliances. So they were looking at the residential aspect coming across here. 2-person team able to do this. Renewables domain, we did a high-efficiency, clean hydrogen production. So hydrogen is still far off, right? But using the labs, they were able to build the model for hydrogen that actually worked, and now it's going to be a longer scope for them to be able to go commercialize, but they have the proof point that's taken place across here. This is my favorite one. So this gentleman here, Alpha Nur, he started out with 5 people. He's a nuclear physicist. He's 23 years old. He's one of these people who just accelerated through school, already has his doctorate at 23. And he said, I can build a small modular reactor, and I can do this using not uranium. And he had all of these things, and the rest of his team could not keep up with him. He was just that fast, and they were actually dragging him down. So he tried to do this, and we teamed him with some other people eventually. But because his science was so leading edge, he now is attached to the Idaho lab right now, because what he has been doing has been amazing. One of the big issues, because I've worked with him personally, is that in order to do small and medium reactors, you need to have a product called halo, which is a chemical element using salt that allows you to do things at different temperature levels in order to have a reaction take place using a higher grade of components. The problem with, the challenge with that for the United States is that most of halo, 95%, comes out of Russia. And we're not in a good position to get access to halo, and we don't want to be held at a stall with that. So he came with the process, and he proved that you can take old nuclear waste that's been buried and extract the halo out of that, and he used the lab to prove that through there. So he's totally changed that game across there. So he's a rock star right now, and universities are fighting over him. He's got a company started up. His long-term plan, it's going to take 10 years to get his product out here, but we talked, without this program, he said he would be teaching. That's his path. He never thought he could be a business person. So it just opened up amazing doors, and he was sitting on Biden's Science Council at 23, because he was considered the nation's leading nuclear expert through this program here. So that's a summary of the program. What I don't have on here, and I'll take any questions, is what's happening next, because I can't show you. Right now, we are literally proposing to the new administration why this program should continue to exist. There's a lot of change of political winds coming across here. They're looking at the expense of everything. We believe, we know the labs will exist. They're there, they do important things. Climate as the forefront is not the right word to use right now in North America for lots of reasons. However, energy security is there. These technologies that we talked about, people need houses to live in. So we had to change the narrative up. We had to prove out why every dollar was accounted for and what was the success rate. So our strategy was this, not to hide and say, we're just keeping the poor labs. We said, let's go bigger. Let's say we created so many jobs. We launched these eight groups. They have national importance to defense. They have national importance to energy security. They are helping turn scientists into commercial accelerators for the economy. And that is literally a friend of mine, Reshma Singh, who I think you probably know. She's like in front of Congress tomorrow, literally presenting the case. And that's what I've been working on with her, along with several other people through here. And we don't know where we're going to be. I have a feeling what's going to happen is they're going to say, make it defense related, make it energy related, and that might shift the kind of applications in which groups come in there and there'll be decisions to be made, but it's where we are right now. So that's why I can't really show you because of what's being presented, but what we were able to say is, let's not go small, let's even go larger. Saying, put all 17 together, we can just have 64 companies come out and prove it to the economy and make big critical decisions like quantum computing and other areas. So that's really what I wanted to present through here. We have about 15, 20 minutes open for any kind of questions. I would always have you think, how do you do that here? Or are you doing this here within your network? Is a program like this interesting to you? What questions do you have? Anything?
I think it's a very interesting kind of alliance that you've been viewed to kind of hand more to mature that technology is correct, incubated by or created by these startups, right?
Right.
So this is supported by government or is it like self-supported? Right?
It's supported by the government. So the funding was this. So there was a large, two chunks of money that were out there. The Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act for semiconductors. So portions of that were given to the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy is the one that granted this money. And they were involved in this process. So Vanessa Chen and some other folks were involved in this program. And the new person, David Wright, I believe, he literally visited Berkeley 2 days ago because I was on a Zoom meeting with him as we were talking through stuff.
Why I'm saying that? Because energy labs are involved, so
yeah,
it's natural that energy,
yes,
Department of Energy will play a
absolutely
crucial role.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other climate accelerators. I just came to know from a senior, a lady I had acquainted with her long back when I used to attend a conference in the US. She is the program director at NSF.
Yes.
And they are also kind of planning or already had started with creating, something like what we are saying, a climate
yes,
accelerator or
yes,
something they call. So looks like there is some similarity, but maybe that would more work on soft part of climate or maybe like more climate modeling, projections, resilience.
yes,
Not maybe, and this is more deep tech.
and
It's probably only deep tech.
yes, this is what we call deep tech. So these programs are not unconnected. They're not connected budget-wise, but we talk all of the time to make sure we're not duplicating efforts. Yeah, these are not competing for dollars. There's enough dollars to go around, but it's a great point. So we know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what we're doing, and some of us sit on both councils. I don't sit on both of those councils. I sit on this, and I sit on the AI Council for the U.S. So I sit on those two parts. But there are people that overlap on here. So yes, there are additional programs. This is why we said this is what we focus on. So we weren't duplicating, and there are obviously parts that go with other areas, but NSF doesn't have a nuclear accelerator. They don't have access to Argonne National Labs, but they don't have Argonne National Labs.
So what is the name of this program? How, just like if you Google, what is just Cradle to
Commerce.
That's the name.
That's the name of it, Cradle to Commerce. And then
that
I've Lawrenceburg
becomes,
Labs.
it will, okay. So Lawrence Berkeley Lab is the nodal lab
Yes.
to run it under
Yes.
Department of Energy.
And if you were to go on right now, you would literally see the applications are open. You could sign up and we would start looking at applications because we're also using that to come across here.
Yeah, I only for energy tech and which kind of links all energy related, let's say development, tech related developments. I don't see we have a program. We have Department of or Ministry of Renewables. They have their own program. I don't know how much they are actually linking it with the other labs. Like we have, when you call Department of Energy, we have Department of Atomic Energy,
Right.
which has many labs. I don't think that they have opened it. Although they may not have so many technology developed, or maybe not in form of IP, but they have developed technology, right, in atomic
Yes.
energy establishment here. Now, whether they have anything which is of this kind that they open it, and what they open it here for, that these entrepreneurs, startups can use their lab. Right now, they have access, even they are not working in that lab. If I understand correct, that if a student at Deep University, he has something he's thinking is a good battery tech, and that can be tested at Argonne or
Yes.
at Berkeley or at Tennessee or Oak Ridge, whatnot, he has access.
Oh, he has access.
And
No.
earlier he did not, correct?
Yeah, before he would not, unless he was going to Berkeley and that
That
was
thing,
part of
I
his
think
program.
is still, that kind of thing is not here.
Yeah.
So, not to my knowledge.
Yeah,
That's
you're
all.
exactly right. So let's say you're going to MIT and you're doing battery, engineering, but you really want the IP and you need time on an accelerator, which doesn't exist at MIT. You would spend a year at Berkeley, still working, your degree, but you are now working in the lab. You're doing the work at Berkeley, and you're testing in lab and you're getting access to at least our best experts in what you're trying to study and coming across there. And the single most attractive thing to you as an individual is the IP. Because let's say what's key is you really have to understand aluminum batteries and hydrogen, for example. And of course you have to know it well enough, but having the patents and the IP for it, you can now have it. You have to still run the tests, you still have to run the business, but you're going to be able to get access to the lab if it exists, and coaches will help you do that. So the science part is actually the least complicated part for these groups. It's the other parts of the valley, what I was saying before. Most people get this, right? This is a world that we come from. It's this part of scaling up and commercial launch and saying what's going to happen. That's where all the soft skills really start to take place to go successful across here. So I was thinking, as I'm learning about IIT and how education works here, maybe you don't do it at a national lab, but do you do it at a school lab level? Do the schools maybe have a subset of schools that can share things? Could you run a similar kind of program? Tie some mentors along with some institutions that were normally just working in the private world that says, we run businesses, this is how you get your money. I don't know whether this is taught here, as part of your curriculum. I'm sure it is at some level, but if not, you could mimic something along those lines, those same kind of classes and soft skills, and perhaps that would increase the odds of things going forward. I don't know. To me, I do this every day, so the questions aren't obvious to me because now I've been doing it for a couple of years. You should ask questions because you don't know how much access you're going to get to me. So, right? I'm from Berkeley, I'm from MIT, I'm from Carnegie Mellon. You've got to have questions about how a program works or some of the wins or losses or challenges, as academics or scientists. Okay.
Opportunity, you can ask anything. If you are developing some
Yeah.
tech, ask it.
I was going to ask you, so who has a project or an idea that you think would have qualified for a program like this?
So as you asked that you are working on that all the technologies like here. So is there any team in your work, like any team who is working in like risk management,
In
like risk management, like if suppose one product come into the market tomorrow, then what will be the long term effect of those, like kind of some like new study. So in your group you said that two people have come to know that with hydrogen energy. So the recent new studies also say that hydrogen energy is actually bad for the environmental health.
Right.
So is there any assessment kind of thing in your
Absolutely, it's part of the rubric of going through the process. So these 4 big bubbles are the labs and where they focus. But these sub-teams that I talked about, the engine in particular, this is where they teach you about risk management and how to look at the marketplace, and they'll do the studies with you and enable that. Decisive point will say what are the government regulations and standards and how to overcome those risks or know what's acceptable in order to qualify. And the One Valley group will say we commercialize companies. They're the ones that actually commercialized Palantir and brought them to market. They actually brought Google to market. So those are the level of people that will be looking at this with the teams that go through here.
No, I mean, if in the future, if anything come up with a higher risk, so that will be manageable or what? So if this kind of data will be available at this point or what?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I think what I'm hearing is, so what happens in the future on the risk? You know what? That's up to you as your business. That's how the world works. You eventually, if you get to a point where you now have IP and you've gotten some seed money to get through this process, but you've taught how to get further seed money, now you've got seed money, but then you have the same world that everybody else has to do as a business owner to defend your business, scale your business, or become something else in there. So there's always going to be a certain amount of companies that will go away and a certain amount of companies that will come forward. That's true in any business. I guess the question I would have too, because I don't know any of you and I don't know what kind of projects you're working on, but do you find any of your projects is missing, quote, a piece of IP as part of your solution? Because this would be one of the mechanisms that would say, along with learning soft skills, I need to know the formula for X, or I need to validate my experiment. That's the other thing that this brings. So would this help any of you, on your paths?
So, what is the future prospects of climate tech companies? How the growth will be there? Various climate tech companies, how the growth will be there?
Right.
Whether there will be a good growth for climate tech.
Yeah.
There is already, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can tell more.
It's a great question, because before the last president elections, there was a very clear path of going through what people were doing. Particularly residential was huge, but it's really comes down to the same things here, just different scales. And I don't mean by scales of size, just where it's at. It's all about energy. It's all about water. Decisions in the U.S. were going nuclear more than anything else, because solar, we can't compete with China. And if you were to ask for money for solar, it's just no VC is going to give you money for it. They're saying that the market's already saturated. But nuclear is something we're very good at. And there's investments happening there. It was interesting, halfway through the process, everybody started putting AI after whatever they were doing, saying, and it's also going to be AI enabled. They hadn't figured it out yet, but they knew if they didn't have that in their pitch, they probably wouldn't survive the process. The residential is huge with population of what happens at the home level, because one of the challenges that we have, and this is one of the roles that I look at from a commercial perspective, is does it make sense to put a lot of money into cities where populations are leaving? To redo and rethink a city when less people are going to cities, is the payback there? Versus maybe developing something else. Water, how do we deal with our freshwater rights? How do we deal with agricultural things? Like our next cohort will include agriculture, sciences. We're going to start looking at food security, for example. So it's a constantly changing thing, but we've changed the terminology. Because right now, if you walked into anybody and you said, I'm doing sustainability and climate change, you could get kicked out of school. I mean, that's what's happening in the US right now. And it's bad. I mean, it's totally bad. But they still need the same solutions. They need independent grids, they need high-powered energy, they need water, they need nuclear, they need agriculture, they need all the same things, but it's changing the terminology is what the game has become about. I won't get into political views on this, but I'd say the smartest thing that the previous administration did, which is kind of quiet, but it's obvious, when they gave out the federal money, they actually put most of it into states that would vote for Trump. Because they figured that even with the change of administration, nobody likes to give money back. So even though there's a lot of talk about things, 80% of the funds are being spent in states that support him and vote for him, so that money will survive. So I'm pretty sure this program is going to survive. It's probably the smartest thing we did. So anyway, I think we've got 5 more minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to know more about your technology in the building sector. So I am a civil engineer. I am currently working with LiDAR. So I never knew that LiDAR could be used to decarbonize.
Sure. Okay, and what are you doing with it? What are you looking at? And then I'll tell you what that team is doing.
So you used a terminology called thermal LiDAR. So how can this be used to decarbonize?
Sure.
Like whatever it is that you are doing with thermal LiDAR. What are you doing with it?
Okay. So I assume we all know what LiDAR is.
Yeah.
Pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what they developed was either a handheld device or you see something on a tripod. It does a thermal scan using the LiDAR of the room, and it finds out the coefficiencies of the windows, the air conditioning unit, the lights, and it does a carbon check of a baseline, and it calculates that automatically into a system. And then as you start doing interventions, it measures the interventions. So you're able to basically walk through this building with this device, put it in some rooms, and 4 hours later, you can build a digital twin map of everything that's going on in the building with carbon using this thermal LiDAR. That's their idea, and they proved that it works. So it's already being commercialized.
So in simple terms, it tells me is the building efficient, have the outlets being positioned in the right way?
Yeah. Well, those are things that you still have to do the calculations on, but it will give you a baseline of what is the carbon signature of this room, what's the energy efficiency, and it basically looks like you're looking at a UV thermal image when you're walking around with it, but it dumps the data into dashboards and it's built an automatic digital twin, so then you come back 4 hours later, you set it on your computer, and I can start going through a digital twin of the building looking at carbon points, saying, oh, windows here, outlets are over here, air conditioning is doing this based on what's going on. That's what their technology does. How it gets implemented to go fix is up to, that's not what their business is. That's not where their focus is. It doesn't solve it, but it identifies those areas. And the old means, as you would know, is I'm just putting a bunch of sensors in a room, I'm looking at utility bills, all of these things. That's what their product is, and they were able to commercialize it to large companies like Johnson Controls, Carrier, J&L are all interested in this because now they can simply walk through and prove the building is doing X or saying what's the gap that's coming across there. And then the data gets collected at a national level. And that's how we can say so much improvement is happening across the board. Does that make sense? To answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. There's another presentation later on next week that I'm going to specifically talk about building and smart building design that deep dives into things like that I've implemented or worked with teams that have implemented. So hopefully you can show that one because that's like a 2-hour lecture, but it shows very specifically solutions on buildings. Okay? Okay. So I think we're right on time for the first hour, unless there's more questions. Since there's time,
I think we can take a break.
I was going to say, let's take a break.
Yeah,
So you're sitting in a chair.
5-10 minutes. We
Yep.
can go and walk and come back, right? So that we also get some tea.
Absolutely.
10 minutes.
And do me a favor, when you come back, don't sit in the same chair. Switch it up a little bit. Okay? All right. See you in 10 minutes. Okay?